One of the comments I received the most on my original video where I built this train layout was that it wasn't imaginary enough. So today I'm throwing a monster on the side of this mountain whose signature move is sliding down a slip and slide of his own saliva, chomping up everything with protein, helping justify these heavy weapons on the train. And I'm also going to be adding some hikers who will unfortunately be caught in the path of this terrifying monster. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. The monster I'm making today is called the Slide Rock Bolter, and due to the number of requests and because it's a legend from my home state, I was obligated to look it up and do some research. And after my research, I decided it was definitely worth adding to the Wild Imaginary West. I started the build with a lump of aluminum foil which I shaped roughly into the shape of a whale with a hooked tail. That's most of the visual description of these monsters that I was able to find online. I cut up some super Sculpey and started kneading it by hand, but my hands started to cramp up, so I ran to the store and I bought what looks like a pasta roller, but for clay. Makes nice even sheets of clay, a few different thicknesses, but I think the most important thing is that it saved my hand from doing all the kneading. I draped a few layers of clay over the foil skeleton armature, and once the whole thing had been covered in skin, I began blending the seams together with a ball stylus, which I also picked up while I was at the store buying my pasta roller. I intentionally left the clay nice and lumpy and rock-like because in my mind these things should blend into the mountains that they hang from. A normal-looking whale would be far too out of place and easy to spot, even for tourists. I used my new stylus to give the interior of the mouth some detail, and then I sliced up a little sheet and rolled it and formed the tongue of this slide rock bolter. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the way these monsters hunt is by speeding down the sides of mountains on a slide of their own saliva. They use their hooked tails to latch onto rocks or ridgelines waiting for tourists, yes, specifically tourists, to cross their path. I will list all of my credible sources for this information below, but if you are indeed a tourist visiting Colorado and you find yourself hiking in the Rockies, be careful. Another animal that I used as visual inspiration for this monster is the stonefish, which looks exactly how you would imagine it to look if you closed your eyes and visualized a stonefish. After building up some volume where the eyes are going to be, I used the ball stylus again to make some sockets. After those had been formed, I put some eyeballs in place. After the eyeballs, it was time for some eyelids, and after those had been put in place and blended into the surrounding eye area, it was time to make some indentations for the teeth. While this monster doesn't have the sheer number of pointy pearly whites that the dragonfish from my last project does, its mouth is scary and impressive nonetheless. I made an assortment of teeth types this time. I baked those first before I stuck them in place. Of all of the teeth that I made for this monster, I think my two least favorite are the two front teeth on the top row. They have an uncanny, almost human tooth-like appearance. And the row of teeth on the bottom, I pointed outwards to help scoop up tourists. After giving this guy some hooked fins, I used the rest of the leftover teeth as spines, which I embedded in the monster's back. This monster has no natural predators, so these spines are not for self-defense, but aesthetics and aerodynamics only. After a few finishing details and added texture, it was time to throw this bad boy in the oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes. After that, this mountain whale was ready for some paint. I broke out my airbrush and began with black, sprayed from underneath to establish the shading. I then followed that up with some field drab, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite base coat colors. It's very versatile and can be a base layer for many different colors. Next, I established some highlights using a light tan, and then I began painting the interior of the mouth, starting with the base layer of red. After that base coat of red, I followed it up with a pale pinkish lavender color. In order to help the monster blend into the terrain that I'm going to be adding it to, I gave it a dusting of the same sky blue that I used on the mountain, followed by the same highlight color of an almost white sky gray. I then moved on to painting the eyes. I gave the eyes a base coat of gloss black, followed by yellow irises with thin vertical black pupils, similar to what you'd see on many other ambush predators. I gave the eyes an orange gradient, and then I painted the pearly whites with contrast skeleton horde. I also used that for all of the spines on its back. I followed up the skeleton horde with a thin layer of white on the tip of each tooth and spine, then I broke out the UV resin to give a glossy look to the eyes. I used a brush to carefully apply the UV resin and avoid getting it anywhere but the eyeballs themselves, except the entire mouth. I was sure to coat the tongue and whole mouth with a believable amount of wetness. When saliva is your strongest tactical advantage, you gotta have a lot of it. I then took this bad boy outside and gave it a protective coat of varnish in preparation for this next step. This is an oil wash that I made from some burnt umber oil paint and some odorless mineral spirits. I've seen 52 Miniatures and many other mini painters use oil washes, so I decided to give them a try. After coating this whole fish in an oil wash, I left it to dry with a hairdryer. I then used a paper towel dipped in mineral spirits to remove the wash from all of the high points, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. With our giant slippery monster done, it was time to pick out and paint some tourists. I chose an assortment of people in various stages of fight or flight. This gentleman, for instance, is in full tilt trying to get out of the way, which is what I would recommend to all of you tourists if you ever find yourself in the same situation. I loaded up all the figures on some painting bases, as well as some mules and one more running figure, and while I paint these, let me tell you the story of the destruction of Rico. Many years ago, there was a park ranger who was responsible for a few peaks in the San Juan Range in southern Colorado, a very visited place by tourists. They were having problems with a slide rock bolter in the area, eating all the visitors and scaring away the rest, which reduced the town's income dramatically. The park ranger got fed up and decided to put an end to the bolter by strapping explosives to a mannequin that he dressed as a tourist. The plan worked really well, and the bolter did take the bait and exploded, but unfortunately it was really close to town when it did, so it destroyed half of the town of Rico as well. The end. I can already hear the complaints in the comments section saying, "Why did you ruin the nice landscape with that horrible ugly monster?" Don't worry, I installed all of the figures using pins so I can take them out whenever I want to, including that big ugly horrible monster. I attached a little lead from the mules to one guy who's trying to get them out of the way, and then I put the monster in place. I added some UV resin coming out of the monster's mouth, which might as well be snowmelt runoff, and I also added a little hiking trail that these out-of-towners foolishly decided to hike on. I sealed that with some isopropyl alcohol and watered down white glue. The last thing to do was to make some ripples on the water, another comment that I got a lot of in my last video. I used some gloss Mod Podge to create those ripples, and after this mountain lake was nice and ripply, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.